turn. I am playing Kat's part, where I'm going to talk about facts, because when Kat pitched The Last of Us, it was clear that we would have to switch roles because I cannot play this game. I cannot stealth. And you could probably find that video when I tried and how frustrated I was. And it was very toxic for anyone who was around me.
I remember you getting so mad.
I was so angry.
I was like, Gabe, people probably don't want to watch you just curse a lot. And I was like, but it's fine. I'm going to let you do it.
I had to start over that one section. Like, I got as far as like, oh, we have to take Ellie across country. And I was like, no.
This is like a lot of work.
JK, we don't. I wasn't going to do it. But on top of that is the fact that, like, one of the reasons why I even tried to play the game was that mushrooms and fungi are genuinely terrifying to me. I am very afraid of them. Which is like funny because if you're watching, I have it on my face. So the clickers and like the main thing, it's like, it's so much like I can handle zombies. It's like corpses, right? Like it's gross, but it's not your like a mushroom monster.
Yeah, it's not your makeup right now.
It's not. Yeah, it's not like there's some images of clickers that like haunt my nightmares forever. There's a part of like trypophobia that comes in when it comes to mushrooms, like, and they have like their little gills that really get to me. Yeah. But there's so much else, just like everything about, like, I think they're beautiful. And I think that like parts of them are really fascinating. And I also eat them. Like, I get it. But I am like, we need to respect fungus.
Because it could murder you.
Like, we need to respect it. It's the same way I feel like I don't ride horses because I respect them too much. They are big, powerful beings. And there's no way I'm going to disrespect you and ride on you. That's not how that's working. Anyway.
I can't because I'm allergic. Yes.
I have this. It's stupid. I get it. But like on this, there's just something in me where I'm just like, no disrespect, sir horse. So I am not a fungiologist or whatever, whatever it would be called. Because I know Kat often will disclaim, we do research, we do what we can, right? We have the internet, so everyone's like a little pocket scientist every now and again. Yeah. But I am terrified of them, and so through that terror have done research, because that's what you do when you're afraid of something. You're like, I need to know more and to solidify that fear, and we're going to have a little bit more of that next week where Kat's going to go on a journey that I went on.
No. I'm so not excited.
So I have looked into the millions of truly horrifying things that they are capable of doing. So did you know, my dear Ghoul Scouts, that fungi are genetically closer to humans than plants? Genetically, they are like the cousin of humans.
Oh, Lord, right? That's news to me.
When we started becoming people, fungi were there, right? They were one of the first things in there. Breathing, living, you know? And then we're like, it's a plant. It's not a plant. It's live in such a way that plant is not. So some fungi can even move on their own. Okay. So just need you all to be where I am. They are alive and they are real in a way that we wish our houseplants were real. Like, we're like, we would love it if they were like, they could tell us what they're doing. Anyway. And in a way that I 100% wish fungi were not alive. I have seen many horror-adjacent content that is related to fungi that have stayed with me for forever in the way that a lot of those things do, just because I'm like, oh, no, we're doing mushrooms? Cool. All right, that's great. Including an episode of Hannibal, and I love Hannibal. It's a beautiful, disgusting masterpiece of a show that is also very traumatizing. And one day we will do Hannibal because it's so beautiful. And there's just things that they do to the human body that, like, you never would think you would say that's beautiful, but it was. Like, there's a point where someone's made into an instrument, and I just can't. It's like,
I don't want to see that.
You have to. You'll be changed, but there's a part of it that has to do with...
Are they alive while it happens?
Mushrooms.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But there is an episode regarding mushrooms, and I was like, yeah. I think there is an episode of Criminal Minds or something like that had mushrooms, or there's like a serial killer as well. It happens. Mushrooms are scary, and the fact that they're so close to humans and like that they can live and flourish in dying places and they thrive despite all else. It could be, you know, inspiring and also really scary, especially when I tell you what the clickers in this apocalypse world are based on and how they're pretty close to real things that happen. And God forbid they ever really happened, we would be done. So in the Last of Us universe, as Kat explained, there's a post-apocalyptic wasteland full of broken people who are trying to survive and are seeking revenge for wrongs that have been done to them and those they love. Cool. But in this apocalypse, like most others, it really questions what it means to be human and how strong our connections are to like societal expectations and duties and blah, blah, blah. And the monsters are kind of like a secondary thing, right? Like zombies are kind of, you forget about them. But I think further than that, in The Last of Us, it offers us a truly horrifying premise that, unlike zombie films, is possible. In the incredibly early days of Ghouls, I think like episode 5 or something, we covered zombies. And we talked about in that episode how there could be zombies. And we discussed certain parasites that could control your mind. And this is pretty much the same thing. Though it's not to the same level as our cinematic monsters, this idea of a parasite taking over as a host for your brain and reducing humans to their basic instincts for survival is really unsettling and is pure horror just in that. But with The Last of Us, it's also based on real parasites, real life things that are controlling their host for their own wants and needs, and now people don't mean anything. The infection in The Last of Us universe is similar to that of a zombie infection, where we're turned into creatures that are driven by instinct, but in a need to spread the infection. It's always important with a parasite. But instead of like a vague what if scenario, this infection is literally based on a real life fungus. The name itself is like, this is real life fungus. So, according to the Last of Us wiki page, they say the mutant infection began to spread in the United States in late September 2013, and in just several months, roughly 60% of humanity was either killed or infected by the Cordyceps fungus, referred to as the Cordyceps brain infection. And that the whole thing is like, they called it the Cordyceps brain infection in the game, and there's a Cordyceps fungi in our life that exists. So super spreading infections sound a bit too real right now in the midst of Omicron that is spreading. But I will say the one silver lining to COVID and Omicron is that it is not this fungus. That's it. That's what I got for you. It's not a fungus that takes over your brain and gives you these spores on your face. But I am going to explain the very real Cordyceps fungus and why you should be afraid. But first, let's go through the progression of the game's infection and what that looks like so you can get properly terrified the way that I am. So this infection evolves through 4 stages, each one increasingly more horrifying than the last. So the first one is called runners. They're called runners. And in this step, this stage of the process, the fungus grows while the host is still alive. So this is that, zombie bite guy. He's like, it's nothing. And it takes away any higher brain function, and with it, their humanity. So they become violent and just reactionary. And it causes the infected host to get hyper-aggressive and incapable of reason or rational thought. And runners have terrible eyesight, but they are still like, they can still see, and they still look human and sound human, which is also really terrifying because when you hear them in the game, they sound like people moaning instead of like a monster. So like you have that instinct to be like, I gotta go save that person, but it's not a person. It's a monster. And it really kind of shows, this first step shows like the fitful resistance of the human body, but it's gonna fail. It's for naught. Stage 2 are called stalkers. And as the infection progresses, the infection begins altering their sight, and as a result of progressing fungal growth over their head, and creates a corruption of their visual cortex. So this is where we're starting to get that like classic clicker look on your eyes. This stage takes anywhere from a week to a year, depending on just like people, body to body. It's different. We're learning that here in our actual pandemic. The stalkers are still vaguely human-like, but are way more routed. This is where you begin to see the growths. And because cordyceps are capable of bioluminescence, some of these stalkers glow, which is fun. A little glow-in-the-dark monster to come get you. Stage 2 is also where they start to use that echolocation. So they leave behind those like human groans for this like odd croaking sound that they're using to locate their prey instead. So they're becoming a little creepier. Then we get to all the worst of the game and why I was like, oh, I got to play this game because I'll cry. And they're called clickers. My nightmares. At this point, the infection will eventually scar the face completely, causing them to lose their sight and resulting in them developing a primitive form of echolocation to compensate. They cannot see. This stage occurs after a year or so, and clickers rely entirely on echolocation since they no longer have eyes. At all, and instead have disgusting and haunting growths where their eyes once were.
Yes.
Poor babies. Their echolocation comes in the form of unsettling clicking sounds that will haunt your dreams, and that's why they're called clickers. And the infected folks are even less human. Their bodies are mostly a fungi at that point. And then there's a stage 4 that are pretty rare in the game, but do exist, and they're called bloaters. So over a very long time, they will eventually develop hardened fungal plates over most of their body. If the fungus kills the host body will grow stalk-like fungal projections, which release infectious spores. The infection can also be spread through bites from living hosts. Hosts can only be affected when alive, as the fungus is unable to infect dead bodies due to its parasitic nature. It wants you alive so you can spread it, and it could use you as a puppet. So even then it's dead, it can still spread its virus, but if you're alive, it's coming for you. The bloater stage takes decades. In rumors, it's decades to do. And unlike the clickers and other infected, the bloaters aren't mobile. Or as mobile or sophisticated enough to use their echolocation, but instead they fulfill their need to spread the infection by releasing mycotoxin. So they're just like, there, now you're it. And when I tell you about the real friggin' fungus, that's just a thing that it does. So that little explanation is just to help you sleep tonight. Just think of those and fall fast asleep. But now let's get into the nonfiction, the real life, truly horrifying, real fungus that really exists.
Yay!
It's very real. As I mentioned, The Last of Us Cordyceps brain infection is based on the real Cordyceps fungus, and the inspiration from the infected came to the directors Bruce Straley and Neil Druckmann after watching a BBC Planet Earth clip. And
I told you it's horror.
You may recall a Ghouls episode in which Kat has said adamantly that any episode about the underwater world that we live in is a horror movie.
It is.
So
Planet Earth is horror. Our planet is scary.
Our planet is scary, and here's the facts. The clip in question features the infection of an ant by this Cordyceps fungus, and I'm not big on science, but I remember learning in school about this fungus, and it's one of the only things I recall from school regarding science, because I was like, that's horrifying. I guess I'll never forget that. And I definitely saw the similar clips that they were using in the Planet Earth clip. And I was like, yep, that's the thing that's in my nightmares. So in this clip, we hear Sir David Attenborough as he explains the progression and horror of the parasitic infection. So first, the infection occurs. And in a super helpful article on Medium, I found the zombie fungus in The Last of Us is actually real, by Katie Wrights, who I'm 80% sure we've done we've cited Katie Wrights before. But they say a foraging carpenter ant walks through an area of the tropical rainforest floor infested with microscopic spores dropped by a mature fungus, and the spore excretes an enzyme that eats through the ant's exterior shell. And that's gross. And next week when we talk about what's going on there, you're going to be even more afraid. So that's how they get infected. It gets into their shell.
There's
and
spores.
Then once infected, the fungal... Oh, sorry. I did mess up my quotes here. The fungal cells in the ant's head release chemicals that hijack the insect's central nervous system.
That's good.
So it's taking over. And the ant will latch onto a tree or like a stem, and they call it technically the death grip. So after 2 days, the ant leaves its tree colony and climbs down to a spot where humidity and temperature are optimal for fungus growth, because it knows that. And the ant crawls onto a stem or the underside of a leaf and bites into the middle vein so it won't fall, and then it dies. So this fungus that is alive and intelligent hijacks an ant, takes it away from its friends, and then latches onto a leaf so it won't fall when it dies. And then it dies because it's like, I'm done with you. I didn't need you. That's all I needed you to be alive for, is so that you can grab onto this leaf. And in the video, this is where you can see the body of the Cordyceps fungus growing out of its head. And it's like slowly just like this little, and it's this haunting progression of it excreting and growing and like reaching out. And it's so gross. And that is the fungal growth stage, where the fungus eats the ant's internal organs, using its shell as a protective casing. So it's just chilling on this stem, eaten from the inside. And the fungus main stem, the stroma, erupts from the back of the ant's head and grows. And at the peak of infection, about 40 to 50% of the ant's body is made up of fungus on the inside. So if you'll remember from the clickers, they were majority fungus by that part. Because it ate all your parts on the inside. It's so scary because it's like not even, like it's not made up. This is like science.
Yeah, like what if people stepped on it? What would happen? If
this affected people, this is literally what would happen. And so after about 3 weeks of this poor ant being devoured from the inside, it will begin releasing spores from the tip of that little thing that seek to infect other ants and turn them into fungus heads. And the mature fungus releases spores from the stroma, and the spores fall to the ground, creating a 10 square feet killing zone, which will attack new ants. Again, because it's strategic. So it's just like a bomb of, like, let's get all these guys. So at this point in the video, Sir Attenborough lets us know that the infection is strong and could wipe out entire colonies of ants. This is why if an ant is discovered with the infection, they will be cast out. Like, the group is like, nah, you gotta die. Like, you cannot be here, which is what we see. Like, ants are super smart, so they do that. But if they don't get caught and they happen to be nesting up there, you don't see them, and then they're dropping their spores, now the whole colony is dead. And even more excitingly, there are thousands of different types of Cordyceps fungus, and each focus on one species. They adapt so that they could be the most lethal for whichever species they are attacking at one time. It's great. And in an article on Live Science titled "Zombie Fungus Enslaves Only Its Favorite Ant Brains" by Joseph Castro, the helpful and positive writer that they are, say, parasitic fungus known to manipulate the brains of ants doesn't make slave-like zombies out of any old host. Instead, the microorganism is somehow able to recognize the brains of different ant species and releases its mind-controlling chemical cocktail only when it's in a preferred host, new research shows. So it's not just like who we want, whatever. It has a plan. Like, it has a modus operandi. It's like it has a serial killer that knows what it wants. It's so ridiculous. This is a fungi that we're talking about here, right? It has a fungi, yeah. It's not mindless or purposeless infection that spreads wherever. It's aware of its evolutionary needs, so it strategically chooses which species of ant to infect and when and who. So that's fun, and people are like,
yeah, what if it was like people now, though?
Yeah, right? So in an interview with Game Informer, titled "The Inspirations for The Last of Us," creators Straley and Druckmann were inspired not by the gruesome video, but rather like just the video, like they'd watched it, they were like, whatever. But it was actually when Sir David Attenborough explains that the more numerous the species, the more likely it is to become infected. So it's like if there's a larger population of whatever this is, like it's definitely getting infected. And so they ask themselves, what if this thing jumped to humans? Yeah, what if? What if?
Oh no, I see what is coming next visually, and I'm upset. Continue.
I'm sorry. The terrifying thing about the cordyceps fungi is how it evolves to best suit each of its specific intended targets. And the different types and the results of the infection can be oddly beautiful. And like they have this, I've seen like this sped up version of like the different cordyceps fungus in these different insects, and that like growing and blooming with like this new live, and others are just horrific. So here's a little bit visual pleasure for anyone who's watching.
Yay.
Where you can see how each one looks very different, and they all also serve different purposes. Because there's also one called, if you're listening to this, I want you to look it up. It is for specifically tarantulas, because they're not scary enough just on their own. And it's called the Cordyceps Ignata. And this one sprouts several buds from its victim. And the kicker is that it doesn't aim to spread its own parasite. It actually just kills it. So it just does it for giggles. So it turns a tarantula, again, already terrifying creature, into this thing just for kicks. Not even for, like, it's
spreads.
Cruel. It's so gross and awful. And the way the infection spread was a bit similar to our current COVID situation, in which humans ate things and spread things unknowingly in the game. So there's like a newspaper clipping in The Last of Us that you can find at Joel and Sarah's house, and it says that the infection began spreading after a series of crops became infected in South America, and the Food and Drug Administration's investigation of crops potentially tainted with mold continues across the country, the article reads. Initial lists distributed to vendors nationwide warned against crops imported, but now the scope has extended to include Central America and Mexico. And it's like, it gets everywhere. So it's just like food. Like you wouldn't even know. It's just all of a sudden it was here. And when I was Googling the fungi, I found that many people actually take the cordyceps fungus for medicinal purposes. Like right now, today, they do. Like I saw that's when you look up cordyceps fungus, that's the most thing that you're going to see is like go buy it at Whole Foods. But here's some good news. It is unlikely that we'll see this fungus infection in humans. There are currently no species of cordyceps that target humans or mammals of any kind, and it would probably take a very long time. So it doesn't mean that it couldn't evolve to one day do that. It's just more likely to take thousands of years for that evolution. And if there were a cordyceps fungus-like infection, then after the years, plural, of the pandemic that we've had from a simple respiratory infection, I have very little doubt that we as humans would be able to maintain that spread of an infection like this.
Yeah, I think we would die.
Yeah. We've had years of this. So it's also like, who's to say that one of these medicinal purpose drugs that are made with cordyceps doesn't alter the timeline? The fact that like people are regularly ingesting this, and probably like there's probably people trying to expedite the way that they're making those so that people can get access to them quicker. Like there's all kinds of things that we're probably doing chemically to them for people to ingest them that could jumpstart their evolutionary process in this timeline and speed it up so that it actually happens. So it's not fiction. It's very real.
Ow.
And I'm valid in being terrified of mushrooms, and I want everyone to know.
There's also like a really interesting documentary on Netflix that's just about mushrooms, like about fungi specifically.
I won't.
So it's definitely super terrifying. I feel you.
Still have mushroom for it.
You don't know. That's good. You don't have mushroom game?
I don't have mushroom for it. I'm not a very fun guy. Yeah,
good.
well, yeah, people can watch it. I'm not going to do it, although I get it. And this is just step one of many episodes we're going to have in this eco horror world. And it's like, I think a part of this series that's really scary is how real it is. Because it is like it's just like one little evolutionary step away for this to happen, and that sounds like stupid. But then you have that whole world that you like. I have no doubt that it would come down to something like it did in the game, and that someone would make the decisions that they made, right?
Yeah.
Because people be like that. Like it's not fiction in that way. And what we're gonna find in this series, I think, is something we already know, especially since we're in the middle of an entire Panini press, is that the people in charge don't do what they should, and or they react too late, and now it's over. Like now, we got.
And a big thing that I think like this game could do really well is play upon the fears that are very valid and exist around the fact that COVID is new. And something the game does pretty well is like show what happens when the fungus gets to exist for a while. That's why they set it 20 years after the pandemic has happened in the game. So like even extending that timeline further would be really interesting and probably scare a lot of people, because that's a big fear that's happening right now. We don't know what will happen 20 years from now to humanity, just from the fact that this illness has evolved where it has and what is happening. So I think if they're redoing that, there's a lot of different ways that they could take the monsters, that they could take what happens to the remaining population. Does it instead attack the food supply because of the fact that there's not enough humans left?
And adapt.
Yeah, like there's not enough humans left in this world, 60%. So maybe now it starts to impact other animals. You know, there's lots of like possibilities for like the direction that they could take this. Yeah, it would be horrible. Really horrible, because dogs are a pretty big part of The Last of Us 2. They like are a part of like their survival creation. They like train them to help hunt and like stuff like that.
And they're emotional. Like they're to keep us kind of sane too.
For like emotional well-being too. But yeah, there's like some really cool directions I think the game could go in just with that fact alone, and really play upon those fears that already exist. And I'm sure this period of time has been nothing but inspiration sparking for the creators, because they get to see what it would look like for realsies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The incompetence is not just theoretical anymore. It's on TV. So
yeah. Yeah. And I think it's also interesting because, like, Ellie, if I'm correct, she, like, lived her whole life in this world. Like, she doesn't know pre-Cordyceps fungus world.
Yeah.
So it's like, and now we'll have a whole nother generation of kids people that just, that's not, like, it's the same thing now. Like, we have a bunch of kids whose entire generation are not going to know a world where COVID wasn't around.
Yeah. No,
it's not going anywhere. Like it's going to be here for forever. So it's just a matter of like, that's like a whole different thing too, is because what does that do to morality when you're in a world that's always fight or flight, constant? You get messed up.
And it's also hard because like all the adults are traumatized. So are they doing a very good job taking care of those kids and making them feel emotionally well? And stuff like that, because it's like that's a big thing in the first half of the second game, is that they've rebuilt society in some way, but like so many of the adults just don't know how to process their emotions because they've experienced such extensive trauma that like this rebuilt world is like a veil. Like it doesn't feel real, and it feels like upsetting even to some of the characters who are like, this isn't honest.
And they don't have like therapists.
Yeah.
Like, no one's going to
60%
school.
of the population
we can't,
is gone.
Progress technology or like anything because we're set back. We only got 12 people alive. Like, and I guarantee they're not all the scientists and doctors that we needed. Like that's, it's super interesting. And I think out of all the, like zombies are really scary. Not gonna lie. And depending on which ones they are, they could be even more terrifying, right? Like if they're really fast, like in Dawn of the Dead when they're like, ah. But this is very scary to me, especially because it just happens, and then you're just you're gross. So
Yeah.
gross.
It's very much like, it's hard to avoid because it's airborne. And that's something that's like very different. It's like once you have it, it's done. It's very much like the movie where the thing is falling towards Earth and everyone's just like, all right, melancholia. Yeah. And they're just like, I guess this is what we're gonna do now. And like it just does like a lot of development too, and like, well, do I want to be there for that? There's characters who choose not to be there. And that's even his whole like really stressful and emotional thing, just because like living in that world is hard. So
yeah, I mean, living in this one's hard, so it is very hard over there. But yes, I hope you all enjoyed our first episode back, 2022. Starting hot. Next week, we're going to be talking about the found footage horror film, The Bay. Tune in for that. It's one of my favorite found footage horror films, and for good reason. And Kat's going to go through a lot of things because it's like this. Based on some very real things. Not just, when like fact and fiction is like a blurred line, and that's what this is. So
I'm like never going to Maryland again. I just want you to know that because of that movie, never in my life will I set foot in Maryland for the rest of existence. Anywhere in the Chesapeake Bay. I know that's still kind of Pennsylvania. No food that comes from the water is going in my mouth ever.
Yeah. No more crabs. Yeah.
Locally sourced, I don't know. I don't think that's an option. It's not safe.
Yeah.
I don't want that in me. So
stay tuned for why Kat is terrified of the Chesapeake Bay and why you should be as well. And why you should be afraid of the government that is poisoning us. And don't get married.
Well, eat your kids, or if you have them, I guess. Are you going to have them in this world? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think. Like, why?
They're still going to happen. They happen every day in my entire Facebook.
That's true. And it's not like you have like ready birth control in the apocalypse. So
I sent you a TikTok that was good for that as well.
All right. Well, bye everyone.
Bye, love you.